In the summer of 1920, a man in Boston was making $250,000 a day. Investors said he discovered something nobody else could see. He hadn't. His name was Charles Ponzi, and the scheme he built would become so infamous it gave a name to every fraud that came after it. But 17 years before any of that, Ponzi arrived in Boston with exactly $2.50 in his pocket, after gambling away the rest of his savings on the ship over. He'd left Italy in 1903 at 21 years old, expecting opportunity. What he found instead was years of dishwashing jobs, waiting tables, and sleeping wherever he could. He drifted north to Montreal and took a job at a small bank that served Italian immigrants. It collapsed, and so did Ponzi's patience. He walked into an empty office, found a blank check, and forged a signature for $423.58. When police caught up to him, he simply held out his wrist and said, "I'm guilty." 3 years in a Quebec penitentiary. He was too ashamed to tell his mother, so he wrote her a letter claiming he had a job as special assistant to the warden. After his release, he tried smuggling Italian immigrants across the border into the U.S. It earned him 2 more years, this time in a federal prison in Atlanta. There, he met a fellow inmate named Charles Morse, a once wealthy Wall Street swindler who'd faked illness by literally eating soap shavings to dodge his sentence. Ponzi watched Morse charm his way out of prison early. He didn't just learn a lesson about deception there. He found a role model. Back in Boston by the late 1910s, Ponzi married a stenographer named Rose Necco. He was still broke, still drifting between clerking jobs, still chasing his big idea. Then, in 1919, an ordinary letter from a company in Spain landed on his desk. And inside it was something almost nobody had ever thought twice about: an international postal reply coupon. These coupons let someone in one country prepay return postage for a reply from another. After the war, European currencies had collapsed, making coupons absurdly cheap to buy in places like Italy or Spain. Ponzi realized those same coupons could be redeemed for U.S. postage stamps worth several times more. On a small scale, that arbitrage was completely real and completely legal. But Ponzi didn't think in small scales. In January 1920, he founded the Securities Exchange Company and made a promise that should have raised every red flag in Boston. 50% profit in 45 days. 100% in 90. At a time when a bank savings account paid maybe 5% a year, 18 people invested that first month. $1,800 total, mostly friends doing him a favor. 45 days later, every one of them got paid in full with the profit. Word didn't spread. It detonated. By March, total investments had jumped from $5,000 to $25,000. By May, Ponzi had made $420,000. By June, investors had put in $2.5 million. By July, new money was pouring in at nearly $1 million a day. Lines stretched down School Street outside his office. Carpenters, widows, priests, newspaper boys handing over their pocket change. Even his own chauffeur and brother-in-law invested. At the height of it, an estimated 3 out of every 4 Boston police officers had money in Ponzi's scheme. He wasn't running a con anymore. He was running the city's imagination. He bought a mansion in Lexington with a heated swimming pool, a chauffeured locomobile, custom suits, a gold-handled cane, a first-class ticket to bring his mother over from Italy. He deposited $3 million into a small North End bank, then quietly bought a controlling stake in it. The poor immigrant clerk now partly owned a bank. Newspapers called him a financial wizard. One admirer put it simply: Columbus discovered America, but Ponzi discovered money. Here's the problem nobody waiting in that line stopped to ask. To pay off everything he was promising, Ponzi would have needed coupons by the hundreds of millions, moving through a postal system nowhere near that size. He wasn't buying coupons at all. He was paying yesterday's investors with today's deposits, and praying tomorrow's investors would keep arriving to cover it. It took one stubborn analyst to do the math nobody else wanted to. Clarence Barron, who owned the Wall Street Journal, calculated exactly what Ponzi's promises required. To cover the scale of his scheme, the math called for 160 million international postal coupons in circulation. The real number in existence at the time? About 27,000. The Boston Post ran Barron's findings and kept digging. On August 11, 1920, the paper published Ponzi's hidden past: the forged check, the smuggling, the prison record in 2 countries. The wizard suddenly had a rap sheet, and panicked investors did what panicked investors always do. They ran for the exits all at the same time. A line of people 4 deep stretched from his office all the way to City Hall, demanding their money back. Ponzi climbed on top of a desk, handed out coffee and donuts, and tried to talk the crowd down. For a few days, it actually worked. Calmly cashing out the loudest doubters in public bought him just enough time to look like he had nothing to hide. But state auditors were already inside his books. There was no 160 million coupons. There was barely any coupons at all. On August 12, 1920, Charles Ponzi was arrested. His company was declared insolvent within a day. The empire that took 7 months to build collapsed in an afternoon. Roughly 40,000 people had invested with him. When the dust settled, total losses were estimated at $20,1920, well over $200 million today. 5 other banks failed in the panic that followed, including the one he'd bought into. Most investors recovered only a few cents for every dollar they'd handed over. On his wife's urging, Ponzi pled guilty to a single count of federal mail fraud that November. The judge sentenced him to 5 years. He served about 3.5. He wasn't free for long. Massachusetts immediately charged him with state larceny. Between appeals, retrials, and a second conviction, Ponzi spent more than a decade behind bars in total. When he finally got out for good, he tried one more con, selling swampland in Florida as future beachfront property through something called the Charpon Land Syndicate. It collapsed just as fast as the first one. In 1934, having never become a U.S. citizen, Ponzi was deported back to Italy, the same country he'd left 31 years earlier with nothing. He eventually made his way to Brazil, working quietly as a translator and interpreter. The man who once moved $1 million a week now lived paycheck to paycheck. A heart attack in 1941 weakened him. By the late 1940s, his eyesight was failing. Early in 1948, a stroke left him partially paralyzed and blind in one eye. He spent his final months in the charity ward of a Rio de Janeiro hospital. On January 18, 1949, Charles Ponzi died of a blood clot on the brain. He was 66 years old. He left behind an estate of exactly $75, just enough to cover his own burial. Near the end, he told a reporter he had no regrets. "It was easily worth $15 million, he said, to watch me put the thing over." Almost nobody who lost their life savings to him would have agreed, but his name outlived every dollar he ever made or lost. 100 years later, his scheme is still running, just with new names. Bernie Madoff. Countless crypto collapses, the math never changes, only the costume does. The lesson is the same one Clarence Barron proved with a postal coupon and a calculator. If a return sounds guaranteed and impossibly high, do the math yourself before someone else spends it. If this changed the way you think about money, there's someone else in history who will change it again. Subscribe. I'll find them for you.